Hello and welcome to my Premier League predictions for the 2021-22 season. It's going to be a very interesting season. I'll get to the predictions at the top end. We'll start with the bottom, and generally I'm actually quite good at these. If you go back and have a look at what I did last year, I got 2 out of the 3 of the relegation places, and I predicted City to win the league. So I think all in all I should be pretty accurate with these. I was going to record this a week ago, but I like to wait as long as humanly possible because, well, basically the transfer window is still open and teams can move up 2 or 3 places depending on what they do sign. Of course, apologies, there is no FIFA Millionaire this week, unfortunately. Just with it being 3 people, it's super difficult to try and arrange times. And I had a super busy week anyway with going back up to Derby to see some families for a big birthday. So yeah, unfortunately none of that, but we have got a Premier League prediction. So let's get straight into it with the team at bottom of the league. And I think everyone's going for this team, and it's probably going to be Norwich again. They haven't invested. Their owners are great, and they'll keep doing this yo-yo of, winning the championship and then getting relegated straight away. And eventually it will pay off. If you look at Burnley, they kind of went down a similar route a few seasons ago. But I think Norwich, they just need to get something a little bit extra in the team. They've made a couple of decent signings, Rashika and Sargent on permanence, they're quite good. And they've also brought in Billy Gilmore on loan. I think he'll do quite well for them. I think they'll pick up some points, but I just don't really see them, losing Buendia for 35 million. That's a lot of money, and they've not exactly spent any of their money, the 200 million, for getting promoted. So I think bottom of the league is a fair assumption for where Norwich will finish. I hope they don't finish bottom, but we'll have to wait and see. In 19th, we do have Watford again, newly promoted team. They've only really signed a couple of players. They've brought in, well, technically 3 you could put in there. You got Imran Louza, I'm not too sure who he is, a central midfielder from FC Nantes in the French league. Tufan on loan, Joshua King on a free, and Dennis, the really fast striker from Bruges. Again, I just don't think they quite have enough in that team. They did win their first game against Villa in the first week of the season, but I just feel like they just don't really have that quality that's required to stay in the league. Will Hughes is linked to leave as well, so he's a big part of their team and could be losing them in the next couple of weeks. And I think Watford, they're going to be bottom 15, but most likely in the relegation zone for me. In 18th, we do have Crystal Palace as the final relegation team for me. I think, again, losing Roy Hodgson, I don't think people realise how many points in a season Roy Hodgson probably got Palace just by grinding out results, like 1-0s here and there. They have done some good business, I think, in Mark Gahey, Anderson, Elise from Reading, also Conor Gallagher on loan. I think they're good signings, but it's not exactly like drastically improved their team. They've lost Townsend, Van Arnold and Sacco, so kind of like for like in terms of those. Obviously Elise and Eze will do well. He's still come back from injury, so that'll help out Palace a bit. I don't really fancy that team to do that well this season, with Patrick Vieira as well. In all fairness to him, he's not exactly the most experienced manager in the world, and I think he will struggle with Palace this season, so that's why I've put them in the final relegation zone. Just above them we do have Burnley again. Burnley have signed a backup goalkeeper in Hennessy and Nathan Collins, and the mad thing is Sean Dyche will still manage to keep them in the league. His contract does expire at the end of the season, so it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of weeks. Obviously he wants signings, because essentially what he's done is replaced Ben Gibson with Nathan Collins for essentially the same price, so it's not like the Burnley board have invested anything to the team. They just need more goals basically, and defensively one of the best teams in the league, but they just need that creative spark, and they've only really got Dwight McNeil, Goodmanson, Vidra. You clutching at straws to see like creative players in that team to get them goals, and obviously Chris Wood and Barnes up top do get about 10 goals each, but it's just really frustrating at Burnley, because I think if they got like a takeover and some good investment, they could easily find themselves in the top half of the table. Next up in 16th we do have Brighton and Hove Albion. I think again they'll finish around 15th place is a fair assumption. They have lost quite a bit actually. They've lost Ben White for 50 million, which I think is great business. Davy Proper for on a free, and Johan Bash as well. So they've lost some relatively important players to that Brighton team, so they may struggle a little bit. They have brought in Mwepu from Salzburg, so I'm not 100% sure anything about him, but they have paid 20 million for him, so I assume he's relatively decent for that kind of price tag. But they have got a really good manager in Potter. I think he does really do a great job. You saw it at Swansea, and now you're seeing it at Brighton. But again, as I said, it is when you get to these like middle, from here to 7th, it's kind of the same kind of teams season on season. They're just those regular Premier League teams. They're not going to really go anywhere, but they are just going to about stick around. But it'll be interesting to see how Tariq Lamptey does this season. He did have a great first season with Brighton last season before getting injured. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he does in his second full season at them. Next up, we do have Southampton in 15th. I think they have lost quite a bit. I was tempted to put them potentially relegation zone, even 18th or 19th, something like that. But I don't know. I kind of trust Hasenhüttl to, in the next couple of weeks, bring in enough players to replace what they've lost. Obviously, Bertrand, Vestergaard and Ings, they're like 3 starter players for Southampton. But they have brought in Armstrong, who has done brilliantly in the Championship last season for essentially half the price of Danny Ings, for a player that has a lot better of lot less injuries, and a lot younger. It might be a bit of a masterstroke. They've brought in Perraud, I think that's how you say his name, from, I think that's the French league. I could be wrong, I'm not too sure, but yeah, they paid 10 million for him, so obviously he'll be a replacement for Bertrand. So they're probably just looking for a centre back between now and the end of the window. So it'll be interesting to see how they get along. But yeah, I think 15th. Then again, they've lost quite a bit, but they've still got some decent players in Redmond and James Ward-Prowse. In 14th, then we do have Newcastle United. I was tempted to put Newcastle maybe towards the 10th mark, just because I think they have done some pretty good business. Joe Willock had a really good end of the season with them on loan, but I think it's difficult to put Newcastle any higher than where I've put them, just because they are Newcastle, and there's just such a massive stigma with Mike Ashley and everything. So they've got a very good team now. I think Wilson, Alan St Max, Willock, and then just pop Almiron or Fraser on one of the wings. You've got a really good front four there. Defensively, always solid, of course, with Lascelles and Dubravka goals. So all in all, I think Newcastle, they're not going to struggle this season. I don't think they're going to be in a relegation battle, but I don't see them getting really any higher than 10th. In 13th, then we do have a bit of a surprise one in Brentford. I think Brentford are one of them teams that I think will surprise a lot of people this season. I think they've done some very interesting business that I couldn't really tell you about many of the players, like any signing that Brentford signed, Mbuemo, Michael Forss, players like that you just don't hear of. But Brentford will grab them out of this, random league and just make them, properly good Championship players. So I don't see why they can't do the same, but in the Premier League now. So yeah, I do kind of trust Brentford to get a good mid-table finish for them, maybe even into the top 10. They could do like what Sheffield United and Wolves did a couple of seasons ago. So they've got that kind of calibre of team. Ivan Toney scoring goals for fun, basically. They did draw against Palace today, which is a little bit concerning, but still early on in the season. And I don't see why they can't get into 13th this year. Next up in 12th, then we do have Wolves. I think I'm not massively convinced by their manager that they have brought in. Obviously, he's Portuguese, so that ticks a lot of boxes for them. But other than that, I think they're kind of lacking something at the minute, and it's looking likely that someone like Neves will probably leave, because I don't see them finishing top 10 this season. Obviously, Jimenez is great back from injury, but I just think they've just not looked convincing in their first couple of games. They've lost their first couple, so I just don't really see Wolves doing that well. But they're not going to get into a relegation battle, but they're not going to be pushing anywhere towards Europe this season. So I've put them in 12th. I think that's a fair assumption. I don't think many Wolves fans will be that disappointed, but you never know. Someone like Morgan Gibbs-White might come onto the scene this season and do really well and push them up a couple of places. But all in all, I just think they'll probably bring something out in the next couple of weeks. They'll sign some incredibly good Portuguese player out of nowhere, and they'll go into the top 10 and just kind of shut me up. But for the time being, I've put them in 12th. Next up in 11th, then we do have Leeds United. I think they've not really impressed me at the transfer window this year. They brought in Rodrigo last season for a good amount of money, but they've not really. I don't know what they've done really with their money. I know COVID's been quite a difficult thing for a lot of clubs, but you'd expect kind of a little bit more. But obviously, there's still a couple of weeks left in the window. They could bring in a couple of players and get a lot higher in the table. But I think Bielsa alone kind of puts Leeds in 11th for me. They're going to get wins and draws quite consistently just because of their high tempo and high work rate. Yeah, it's an interesting one, Leeds. If you take Bielsa out of them, you put them in the relegation zone immediately. But for the time being, I've put them in 11th. They'll finish about mid-table. But yeah, I just don't see them really pushing towards Europe this season yet. Next up then in 10th, we do have a bit of a controversial one. I've gone for Arsenal. They've spent the most amount in the Premier League this season out of all the clubs. They've bought in Odegaard, White and Ramsdale for 40 million or something, and Lokonga. And I'm just not that convinced. I just don't really see anything. I don't know why the logical thing for me would have been not to sign Odegaard and kept Joe Willock because he had a really good end of the season with Newcastle, but for some reason they've gone for Odegaard, who, he was on loan for the last season. He's not exactly been phenomenal for him, and they've paid 30 million for him. It's a bit of a weird one for me. Ramsdale's 30 million just to be a backup goalkeeper to Leno. That's not really going to improve your team. And Ben White is a good defender, but I don't think 50 million was exactly the price tag that you should be paying for that kind of player. So yeah, I really don't see Arsenal finishing in Europe this season. I know they haven't got any Europa League football to play, which will help out a bit, but I'm just not that convinced with Arsenal. There really isn't that many good players at the team now. If you really look through it, you're looking at maybe Saka and then Aubameyang on his day, and then you can maybe put Smith Rowe on his day, and there's a couple of there's a couple of youngsters. It's a good project. They'll be decent in a few years' time, but for this season, I just don't see Arsenal really doing that well. So it'll be interesting to see. But I've gone for 10th for them. I think for me, Arteta isn't the manager that Arsenal need right now. But I think they kind of got to stick with him until the end of the season at least and see how he does. But I don't know. It's kind of sad what's happened to Arsenal since Wenger leaving. Really, they've fallen out of the top four completely now, and I don't really see any time soon they're coming back to it. In 9th, then we do have West Ham, who had a really good season last year, but they've not really improved that much. They brought in Areola and made Dawson on a permanent, but they've not really done anything amazing yet. But I'm kind of expecting them to bring in a couple of players between now and the end of the window. There's a couple of players linked to leave, maybe Bowen to Liverpool, stuff like that, just kind of rumours that don't really have much substance to, so I don't see their team changing too much. But you never know, someone like a Declan Rice might go to Chelsea or Man United, which will drop them down a few places, of course. But yeah, I think all in all, I think a mid-table finish for West Ham, they're going to be consistent. David Moyes kind of replicating what he did at Everton before he went to Man United, so I think it's a good time to be a West Ham fan. They've been in a few seasons of just struggling and trying to avoid relegation, and now they're good solid mid-table team. Next up in 8th then we do have Aston Villa. I think they have lost their best player, no doubt about it, in Jack Grealish, but they have invested quite well in Bailey, Buendia kind of replacing Grealish, and then on top of that they brought in Danny Ings, who's going to get them 15-20 goals a season. Twanzebe, Ashley Young, also still looking at James Ward-Prowse and maybe someone like Will Hughes. And I think Dean Smith's a really good manager. I think he's done a great job at both Brentford and Villa since taking over both of those. And I think they've got a really solid defence. There's no doubt about it. Mings and Cons are just unbelievable last season. Then there's Twanzebe to give him a bit of competition. I think Martinez, the sign. I don't know what. Arsenal have signed Ramsdale for 30 million, but they sold Martinez for 15 last season. It's just really. I just really don't understand what they're doing, really. But yeah, Villa definitely heading up. They could, spend another 30 million quite easily this season. They've got one of the best. What's it called? Their owners are, absolutely minted. So there's no doubt that they could, if they need to, sign a couple of extra players on top of that 100 million they got for Grealish, and could very easily get into the Europa League spots. On to 7th, then we do have Everton. I think Everton have done some really good business, actually. They brought in Townsend, Damari Gray and Begovic for about $1.5 million. Well, Townsend and Begovic were on a free, and Damari Gray's the $1.5 million, basically. So I don't see why Everton can't, splash a good 20-30 million on a player between now and the end of the window. I think Benitez is a manager that will get the best out of this team and definitely push them up the table. He'll grind out results, Alan Decore and players like that. He'll just get that extra 10% out of in the midfield just for that work rate alone. I think you'll get a bit more out of Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison. I think Ancelotti did well, but I think Ancelotti needs kind of superstar team, whereas Benitez can kind of work with this. If you look at what he did with Newcastle, I'm not 100% sure what his best finish was with Newcastle, but I want to say he finished about 10th in the league with a very weak Newcastle team. And now he's got an Everton team with some relatively good Premier League players. I think he's got a very good chance of getting them into Europe for the season after. As I said, they've not really spent anything, so that's why I've put them so high, because I expect them to spend quite a bit of money on, I'm not 100% sure what they'll sign, maybe a centre-back or a right-back or something like that. We'll have to wait and see. I'm looking forward to Everton this season with Benitez. I think they'll do quite well. On to 6th place, then we do have Spurs, who, if Harry Kane does leave to go to Manchester City, I could quite easily see Spurs dropping, a good 2 or 3 places in the league, and that's what it kind of rides on. Kane staying could push them into the top 5, maybe top 4. Kane leave them could put them into like 7th or 8th, so that's why I've put them in 6th, just to be kind of middle of the road for the time being. They've done interesting bits. I think Cristiano Romero is going to be interesting. I want to see how he develops in the Premier League. And Brian Gill, not 100% sure about him, but they've spent 20 million on him, so I assume he's decent. But they've lost players like Alderweireld and Lamela, good long-term Spurs players. So it's kind of a new, fresh start for Nuno, who I do rate as a manager, and obviously Heung-min Son's still at the team. Brilliant player. If in a way, I'd be tempted to go. I'm tempted to say that Son's better for Spurs than Kane is, if that makes any sense. But Son is such a good player and really is underrated by a lot of people. I'm not. I think there's a couple of like centre back for Spurs is a bit of a concern, because Davinson Sanchez and Dyer, Rodon, they're not fantastic, when you compare it to an Alderweireld or Vertonghen from seasons past, and that's why Spurs have dropped down the table from a top 4 to a top 6 kind of team now for the time being. I'm interested to see how Nuno does this season. Obviously a new fresh start for the Spurs, and it kind of does ride on whether Harry Kane does stay or go. On to 5th, then we do have Leicester City. I think it's kind of rude if you didn't put Leicester top 5, just because of what they've done really. They've brought in 4 first-team players in Vestergaard, Bertrand, Samari, and of course Daka, and they've lost nothing. They've lost Wes Morgan, who's obviously a legend at Leicester, but he wasn't exactly playing from last season, so it's essentially the same team from last year. They have lost Fofana through injury, so that's a bit of a shame. Obviously, same with Castagna and James Justin. Hopefully they'll be back soon, but it's a really solid Leicester team. It's a better squad than Spurs have for sure. Vardy and Kane, they're not similar, but they're going to get the same kind of goal contribution with them. Daka hopefully gets 10 or 15 goals. Maddison's better than Dele Alli. Barnes is not quite as good as Heung-min Son, but he's getting there. He's getting there. So you look at the like for likes. Tielemans is better than Sissoko and Ndombele for sure. Indeed, he's better than them. Pereira's better than Aurier. So I think you got to put Leicester above Spurs. I don't see why you wouldn't. And I'd be even tempted to put them in the top 4 if one of those top 4 teams obviously drop off. But before we do get into the top 4, what I'm going to say with this top 4 is any of them can win the Premier League this season, which is going to be very interesting. I expect a couple will obviously drop off just because of maybe injuries or just a bad run of games or something like that, but I've gone for Man United in 4th, which might cause a bit of controversy because they have done some pretty good business in Sancho and Varane, obviously 2 first team players coming into the team, but they have to get, between now and the end of the window, a brilliant central defensive midfielder like Saul, Phillips, Rice, something like that, and this team goes into the top position for me. It's just lacking that one midfielder. I know they've got, and the thing is, they'll probably won't sign a midfielder because they got Matic, they got McTominay, Fred to kind of do that, and they'll just expect one of those three, and then obviously Pogba and Bruno as the other two midfielders. So yeah, I've put Man United fourth just on the basis of that holding midfielder. It's just a gap that is just really pulling them back. They just need that, Michael Carrick basically gets them the title, but yeah, we've gone for Man United in fourth. In third, there's a lot of people predicting them to win the league, but I've gone for Chelsea just because they have brought in Lukaku for 100 million. However, if Lukaku gets injured, you're relying on Werner or Havertz, for example, to play and get those goals this season, whereas last season they had Giroud, they had Tammy, to get those goals here and there that kind of Werner didn't pick up. But Lukaku's going to get them 15 goals at least this season, you'd expect, in the Premier League. It's just whether defensively, I think they do need a centre back. I think with the current situation of Zuma, Christensen and Rudiger, that they're okay, but you need like a prime Thiago Silva, and obviously Thiago Silva's getting on a bit now. So that's why I've gone for them in third for the time being. In second and first place then, we do have Manchester City in second and Liverpool to win the league for me. I think with Van Dijk back and a fully fit Liverpool team win the title. However, if Man City do sign Kane between now and the end of the window, 100% Man City, but I've put them in second for the time being just because they don't have a striker. Did do really well today against Norwich with Gabriel Jesus as a winger, so essentially all they've got is Ferran Torres to play at striker, which isn't terrible, but for a team like Manchester City with all the creative play, you sign Grealish, Silva, Kevin De Bruyne and Sterling, Foden, you just need somebody to put the ball in the back of the net, and Kane would be that player. But at the minute they're just lacking that, so that's why I've put them in second and Liverpool to win the league, because I kind of expect Liverpool to sign somebody. They've only brought in Konate. They are playing Harvey Elliott a little bit more, but I think they'll probably lose Origi, sell him or loan him out to somebody, and then bring in another attacker, and that's why I've put Liverpool at top. Obviously Minamino had a decent loan at Southampton, so maybe he'll play a bit more, but they have lost Wijnaldum. I think that's a big loss for Liverpool, but they've brought in Henderson back from injury, of course, who wasn't playing last season. So yeah, I've gone for Liverpool. I think, as I said, any of the top four can win the league. It just kind of depends on a bit of consistency and luck at the end of the day. As I said, Van Dijk coming back from injury is massive for Liverpool, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this prediction. I'm usually quite accurate with these, so I'll have to wait and see at the end of the season. But yeah, let me know your top four and relegation 3 in the comments, and let me know if I did make any massive errors in this. I probably did, but we'll have to wait and see. And yeah, we'll catch you all next time.